The news from Guyana, the region and the world. Compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
A very good morning to you. With the news at this time, I am Tiana Jordan. The news comes to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratories. To begin the news, here's a look at the leads. First, locally, a plane without registration marking has landed at Madia. A 100-year-old woman has died of COVID-19. In regional news, Britain's Privy Council will rule on whether a mandatory death sentence for murder should be made discretionary. The details of these and other stories will be coming up right here in just a moment.
Don't let the fear of contracting the coronavirus disease deter you from seeking the medical care you need. At Eureka Labs, we ensure the safety of our clients and staff with our rigid sanitization routine. This involves the use of ultraviolet lights to effectively rid the air and all surfaces of viruses and bacteria that may be present throughout the lab daily. The light works to rapidly inactivate microorganisms through a physical process that is invisible to human eye. So the next time you need a checkup, don't hesitate to give us a call on 225-7574 to schedule your appointment.
And now the news in detail. A foreign plane without any visible registration marking on Thursday evening landed at the Madia airstrip in Region 8, Petaro Siperuni. There were no immediate reports of anything illegal aboard the twin-engine Piper Seneca plane. According to the source, the pilot is a Venezuelan and the passenger is a Colombian. An aviation source remarked that once the registration marking could not be seen, then the occupants were up to no good. Within the past 5 years, at least 5 illegal aircraft have been seized in Guyana, and a number of them have been made serviceable to be used possibly by the Guyana Defense Force. Earlier this year, 2 foreigners were caught with hundreds of kilograms of cocaine in a plane at Oriala, Upper Quarantine River. The Guyana Defense Force, GDF, stepped in on Thursday and transported the 2 Guyanese men who rode hundreds of miles to Lethem to raise awareness about cancer and mental health. They are Tyson English and Michael Trotman. Mr. English, who started in Georgetown, rode 525 miles. His colleague started the journey in Linden, where he lives. Chief of Staff of the GDF, Brigadier Godfrey Bess, confirmed that a GDF Skyvan transported Messrs. English and Trotman back to the coastland. For his part, Mr. English publicly praised the GDF for transporting him, Mr. Trotman, their cycles and other belongings with the Skyvan bearing registration marking 8RGBW. Initially, Mr. Trotman had lamented the virtually non-existent support from the private sector and government agencies. He had even been prepared to return to the coast by bicycle because he had been unsure of any support for road or air transport. A domestic airline was eventually on standby to assist. He said on their way back to the coast, they stopped at Madia and won further support for their mission. He said a banner would be taken to other parts of Guyana for which persons to sign on in support of the cause to raise awareness about mental health and cancer. The University of Guyana has launched its Inclusivity, Diversity and Equity Policy. That publicly funded tertiary institution has also set up a unit to oversee and implement the policy. Registrar of the University of Guyana, Dr. Nigel Gravesandi, says that the Inclusivity, Diversity and Equity Policy seeks to address issues of discrimination based on race, place of origin, politics, physical and mental health, disability, sexual orientation, and age.
Indeed, The policy underscores the fact that the University of Guyana embraces inclusion, which means that we value and we cultivate full and meaningful engagement of historically and structurally excluded individuals and groups.
He says the University of Guyana addresses the need to include diverse populations regardless of race or sexual orientation. The registrar says UG has sought to remove real and perceived barriers and harassment. A 100-year-old woman who was not vaccinated has died of COVID-19. She was from Cayuni, Mazaruni. The Health Ministry says a 68-year-old woman from Region 4, Demerara Mahaika, who was also not vaccinated, has succumbed to the viral disease. Guyana's death toll is now 930. The Ministry of Health says that of the 56 persons who are hospitalized, 19 are receiving intensive care. The statistics show that 2,552 others have been instructed to isolate themselves at home. Based on the latest test conducted within the past 24 hours, there are 129 new infections. And now in regional news. Britain's Privy Council, Trinidad and Tobago's highest court of appeal, will in the coming weeks rule on whether the mandatory death sentence for murder should be made a discretionary sentence. The case has been brought before the Caribbean Court of Justice by a murder convict, J. Chandler. He received the permission to challenge his sentence on the basis that the mandatory death sentence was not constitutional, as had been deemed by the Caribbean Court of Justice in a ruling in Barbados in 2018. At the close of submissions by Chandler's attorneys and those for the state, the judges acknowledged the case was an important one for both sides and reserved their decision. Chandler was convicted and sentenced to hang for the 2004 murder of an inmate at the prison in Eureka in 2011. His attorneys have advanced submissions that the court can modify the law while overruling its previous decision, which reinstated the mandatory death penalty in 2005, despite it being saved by the provisions of the Constitution, which protects colonial laws from challenge by the constitutional courts. In response to his challenge, attorneys for the state have maintained that the sentence prescribed by the Offences Against the Person Act was valid and in conformity with the Constitution. They have also argued there is no power to modify that section because it did not infringe on any rights afforded by the Constitution, nor does it go against the principle of separation of powers or the rule of law. However, the state in its written submissions noted that if the Privy Council was to reconsider its previous ruling on the mandatory nature of the death penalty and finds it did not have the power to modify one of the laws, it would not oppose a discretionary construction. Developing islands in the Caribbean are set to benefit from a $1 billion investment from the United Arab Emirates, UAE. The Trinidad Guardian says that CARICOM chair and the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, Gaston Brown, was present at the launch. Energy Minister Stuart Young of Trinidad and Tobago says he is not fully apprised of how the initiative would be rolled out. Young is part of the government group attending the United Nations Climate Change Conference led by Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley. Prime Minister Brown sent details from the launch of the initiative on Wednesday about the Energy Transition Accelerator Financing, ETAF. The UAE has pledged some $400 million. The The platform has set a goal of $1 billion in funding. The Inter-American Development Bank, IDB, has launched a $20 million fund to strengthen green fiscal policies in Latin America and the Caribbean, LAC. Win FM Radio says the project has been launched in collaboration with the German government. The trust fund will finance country-specific technical assistance projects. It will also help create a regional knowledge-sharing platform for finance ministries to exchange best practices in the design and implementation of climate-related fiscal policies. IDB President Mauricio Claver-Coron says Latin America and the Caribbean are now equipped to accelerate their economic recovery with fiscal policies that build their resilience against extreme weather events and attract green investments. The announcement comes as climate change experts increased pressure on fiscal balances and public debt in Latin America and the Caribbean. The LACs are looking to strengthen policies addressing climate change and meet ambitious greenhouse gas emissions goals under the Paris Agreement. A recent IDB study on fiscal policy and climate change estimates that decarbonization policies could help create 15 million net new jobs in the region by 2030. The fund is made up of financial resources donated by the German government and managed by the IDB. And now internationally, the latest coming from the BBC World Service.
BBC News. Hello, this is Jerry Smith. 9 anti-government factions in Ethiopia, including the Tigray People's Liberation Front, have agreed to form an alliance to fight the government of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. Catherine Biarahanger reports.
A spokesperson for the Oromo Liberation Army, which is part of the new military and political coalition, told the BBC their aim is to remove Ethiopia's current government, establish an interim administration, and afterwards hold talks to map out Ethiopia's future. 2 of the groups, the Oromo Rebels and the Tigray People's Liberation Front, have already started fighting alongside each other, and this week claim to have captured the town of Kamise, 325 kilometers north of Addis Ababa. But it could undermine the efforts of the US Special Envoy for the Horn of Africa, Jeffrey Feltman, who has started meeting senior Ethiopian government ministers to push for negotiations.
On the day the UN Climate Summit in Glasgow focuses on youth, thousands of activists are planning to march to make their voices heard. Matt McGrath is in the city.
We'll see a lot of young people in and around Glasgow today. You're going to have a Fridays for the Future march in the city. And I think at the negotiations, the negotiators may tend to take a little bit of a back seat. I don't think there'll be as many announcements made today. I think they're very conscious of giving young people the space and giving them the time to make their points about what they feel is going on here. I think young people are quite cynical perhaps about the whole process, but I think they want to see that actually that the UN is listening to them at least. So I think there'll be a lot of speeches later today, and I think the UN will try and actually allow that to take place and to take on board what the young people have to say.
Some high-speed roads in Beijing have been closed due to smog as China continues to ramp up coal consumption to meet power shortages. A monitoring station at the US Embassy says the level of fine particle pollution is very unhealthy. China is the world's biggest emitter of greenhouse gases. Reports from Iran say its stockpile of uranium enriched to 60% has now reached 25 kilograms. Here's our Middle East analyst, Sebastian Archer.
It's been known for some months that Iran has been producing uranium enriched to 60%. A report to that effect by the UN nuclear watchdog back in April was subsequently confirmed by Tehran, which in June said it had produced 6.5 kilograms of the material so far. The latest information suggests that it's now produced 4 times that amount. The concern over the enrichment program is that it brings Iran ever closer to the 90% uranium enrichment, which is considered to be weapons grade. The news comes shortly after Iran said that it would once again join talks on trying to revive the 2015 nuclear deal after a hiatus of 5 months.
World news from the BBC. In the past half hour, the Supreme Court in the Netherlands has quashed an appeals court decision that the Russian state must pay $50 billion to former shareholders in the dismantled oil company Yukos. The Supreme Court has sent the case back to the Court of Appeal to hear it afresh, after finding in favour of Russia on one aspect of its appeal. It said the Court of Appeal had wrongly disregarded Russia's argument that the shareholders allegedly committed fraud in the original arbitration procedure and had to issue a substantive judgment on this. The UN Human Rights Council holds an emergency session on Sudan shortly, following last week's military coup. The UN is trying to broker a return to civilian-led government. At least 10 protesters have been killed in clashes with security forces since the army takeover. Phone and internet services have been severely disrupted. The chairman of Yorkshire County Cricket Club in England has resigned in response to a row over racism. Roger Hutton apologised unreservedly to the former player Azim Rafiq, who said that institutional racism at the club left him close to taking his own life. Mr Hutton said Yorkshire should have recognised the seriousness of the allegations at the time. Mark Ramprakash is a former England cricketer.
There needed to be some more statements, I think, coming out and recognising that the environment was not right. Change has proven to be very difficult, and the club has failed to evolve quick enough in the way that society is changing and our attitudes towards race and racism.
Air quality in Delhi has dipped to hazardous levels following the Hindu festival of Diwali. Despite a ban, people across the Indian capital set off firecrackers late into the night, worsening pollution levels. And those are the latest stories from BBC News.
The news came to you with the compliments of Eureka Medical Laboratory.
A COVID-19 PCR test is now mandatory for many routine activities, including travel and return-to-work purposes. At Eureka, our trained and experienced staff will ensure confidentiality while your test is conducted in a professional and timely manner with results in just 48 hours. So the next time you require an efficient and hassle-free PCR COVID-19 test, call 624-8378, 608-8378, or 623-7233 to schedule your appointment. You can also ask about our house call testing service.
To end the news, here's a look at the leads. Locally, a plane without registration marking has landed at Madhya. A 100-year-old woman has died of COVID-19. And regionally, Britain's Privy Council will rule on whether a mandatory death sentence for murder should be made discretionary. And that's the end of the news.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio Newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.
News Talk Radio Guyana is the station for you, bringing you news updates every hour, major news 3 times a day, edutainment on a higher level, shows like Beat the Clock, Brunch on the Coast, The Afternoon Jam, Youth's Perspective. It's a station that goes wherever you go, streaming online at www.bit.ly/newstalk1031. It's News Talk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM.